Hello, this is the chapter 9 and 10 synopsis, which are combined. Chapter 9 is on the disappearing middle class, and chapter 10 is on wealth, capital, and inequality. Now, you may have heard in the popular press how the middle class is disappearing. Well, there's not really an exact definition of the middle class, but if you look in the textbook, in the paperback book, on page 57, they give you a definition, and they are saying that in 2016, for example, the median income for a family of 3 was 63,000. The middle class, a family of 3 considered middle class, would be making from 42,000 to 126,000. If you made from 126 to 128, you're upper middle class, and beyond 188,000, you're upper class. So we're talking about people making 188 and above, family income. That was 2016. So as I was starting to say before, was the popular press, when they talk about the disappearing middle class, they always talk about, well, there's all this income inequality in the US, and people are falling into the lower class. In other words, they're dropping out of the middle class into the lower class. However, that's not the case. If you look at the statistics, more people are rising up out of the middle class from above, going higher, making more money, than are dropping down out of the middle class from below. So why is this? Well, we see that, just to repeat number 1 here, and my bullet point, or number 1 on this outline. Yes, the middle class is declining, but the main takeaway is more people are rising out of the middle class on the top end than falling below on the bottom end. Why is this? Well, here's some reasons. This is on page 59 and 60 in the book. So basically, just before I get into these details, just think about this. If you have a typical, basically the main reason is an increase in professional jobs. So if you have a degree and you are working in the medical industry, or you have an engineering degree, or working in finance, accounting, any two income earners in the family with these white collar jobs or professional type jobs, you are probably out of the middle class. And so we've had an increase of these professional jobs that have enabled people to rise out of the middle class. Also, they don't mention this in the book, but think about this. Sure, there is an increased demand of jobs that require a skill or require a degree, but this is what's not mentioned in the book. Think about the demand for welders. Think about the demand for plumbers, truck drivers. Okay, a truck driver is not, you don't have to have an education to drive a truck, but there's such a demand for truck drivers because the age, your typical truck driver, the average age is very high. The majority of these truck drivers are at retirement age. A lot of people don't want the truck driving lifestyle where they're away from family, away from home so much. So there's this huge demand for truck drivers. You can make 100 grand a year easily being a truck driver. So, they talk in the book about people rising out because they have these jobs that require an education and high-tech skills. But that's not always the case. You don't have to have a college degree to be out of the middle class making good money, because what we've seen over years is, as these high schools and trade schools have gone out of favor, and the high schools are not focusing on career blue collar type jobs or trades. They're at a premium now, and even more so with COVID, because all of these people, so many people retired during COVID. So I'll give you an example. I was looking to buy a sofa, went to Door Furniture, and which is, if you're not familiar with door furniture, they've been around forever. They've had a store on Elysian Fields in New Orleans forever. Now they have one on the North Shore. So I go there, I'm trying to buy a nice, expensive leather couch that'll last me forever. And the lady tells me, it's going to take you at least 6 months to get a couch. And I said, well, why is that? Is that because of COVID? And she said, well, partially, but she said, as soon as COVID hit, all of the good craftsmen retired. So we've had this great retirement at all levels, teachers, all, at levels, from the high-tech jobs all the way down to low-tech jobs or skilled jobs. So anyway, the point that I'm making is this disappearing middle class, people rising out of the middle class, it's not just educated professional white collar workers. It's also people who have skills that for jobs that are in demand. Okay. So anyway, but let's look at the reasons in the textbook in addition to what I just talked about. So here's some reasons why the middle class is shrinking and people are moving up out of the middle class. Brains versus brawn, right? What they mean there is that, think about all of the technological change from the middle of this past century to now. So in the 1950s, most of the jobs were a lot of manufacturing jobs. Anyone, most people without a college degree, they could get good jobs. Well, those jobs, those manufacturing jobs have been outsourced to countries where the cost of labor is lower. So most of the jobs today, the better paying jobs today require skill and require more education, working in computers, information services, communications, and so forth. So the jobs today require more brains considered as opposed to brawn. So that's what they mean by that. And then kind of tagging on to this, formal education, having a blue collar job that doesn't require formal education, those are not in demand as much as they used to be. And jobs that require specific training and formal education are the ones that are the better paying jobs, with the exception of what I just discussed, because you've got some areas where you've got severe shortages, like plumbers, like welders, like truck drivers, where that's not necessarily the case. Hours of work. The more hours you put in, the more money you're going to make. And so what they're talking about there is you have these high-tech jobs. Maybe you're in IT, maybe you're in the healthcare industry. There's good and bad to having an 8 to 5 job or whatever, 8 to 6 job, 9 to 5, 8 to 4 job. That's really not there anymore. So the good thing about the nice thing about having a job like that was, you had to get up, get ready, go to work, and you were there from 8 to 5. But then when you left, they couldn't get a hold of you. Well, now because of technology, we can be contacted through cell phones, computers, and texts and everything, texts on our cell phones and what have you. And so those lines between work life and home life have kind of blurred, which has increased the stress for people. But so there's good and bad to that. You can think about the benefits and the bad points to that. But if you're in a job that requires your immediate action, if something should go wrong, you're working more hours than 40 hours a week. So people who are on call or working on, may have to go in to fix things. People who are working 60, 80 hours a week, they're making more money to show for that. Of course, they've got the stress also. So that's the point they're making with C here, is that if you have a higher tech job where you work more hours, you're going to get significantly more pay. And then finally, globalization. And they talk about the winners of globalization. The winners of globalization are people with high-tech jobs, where they mention top managers, problem solvers. They mention athletes and entertainers too, because with globalization, you're able to reach billions of people. And so through, if you have a job in communications or IT, high-tech type job, you're benefiting from that. If you had a low-tech job, if you were working in a factory, or on on an assembly line, or had a job that was where it was more brawn than brains, then you've probably lost that job. Those jobs have gone overseas. And so globalization has helped workers on the top end more than the bottom end in the US. All right, so that's basically chapter 9 in a nutshell. So make sure that you understand that the middle class is declining, but it's not bad news, it's good news, because more people are coming out of the middle class and earning more money. Okay, and then chapter 10 is I find really fascinating, because again, the popular press wants us to believe that it's so terrible in America. There's all this income inequality, okay? That we have the rich are getting richer, the poor are getting poorer, and there's just no equality in the US. Well, I would, I'm kind of I mentioned in a prior video, I'm sure I'm more of a half glass full person, glass is half full person. Yeah, there is inequality, because we're not all created equal. We have to do what we can with what we have to get to get along the best we can in life. There was a really interesting study that Bill Gates had funded, the Bill Gates Foundation. They fund a lot of education. And I was reading this paper where they were at New York, and they did this study, and they were trying to figure out why. Basically, economists are trying to figure out how to reduce this income inequality, and how can they raise standards of living? How can they get people who are in poverty to be out of poverty? And so they were looking at the education system, and they were looking at students in the New York area who were in public schools, the worst public schools, all the way up to the most expensive private schools. And they were trying to find a common denominator. Why are some of these students at all these schools failing, and then other students at these schools are doing really well, successful? And so what they found was one common denominator: grit, G-R-I-T. So what they mean by grit is self-determination. And so they found that people that's the biggest factor: hard work, self-determination, that will get you ahead in life. And I've seen that in my family. I've seen that time and time again among students. So, yeah, there are people who are entitled, and that life isn't fair, but you have to work as hard as you can. And if you have the right skill set, a lot of things in life are luck and timing. But if you have worked hard, gotten a good education, and have the right skill set, then you'll be ready when luck and timing comes your way. So anyway, that's kind of an interesting side note on how to make people successful, better their lives. Another interesting study is economists are always, as I mentioned, always trying to figure out how they can end poverty. They also found one of the biggest factors in poverty is the neighborhood, in keeping people in poverty. How can you get out of poverty? Well, the biggest factor is the neighborhood. And so if you're in a better neighborhood, there's less crime, you go to a better school, gives you a better education, and on and on and on. And so they have tried through these social welfare programs to try to bring people out of bad neighborhoods and put them into good neighborhoods. And there was an interesting article, because they found up in Washington, for example, Washington State, that even though they were giving these opportunities to people, subsidized housing in better neighborhoods, people weren't taking advantage of it. And that's a perfect example about how these economists at these think tanks, they don't really think about human nature, because what they found was people were resistant to leave their neighborhoods, because even if you're in a poor neighborhood, you have your family there, you have all your friends there, you've got a social culture there. And so it's really, even if you have the opportunity to go to a better neighborhood and get subsidized housing, send your kids to a better school, a lot of people, I mean, it's a very it's a very courageous thing to do. And so they were just talking about the difficulty, even though we know that putting someone in a better neighborhood is going to give their kids a chance at more success. It's a lot of people don't want to do that. They're resistant to do that. So that's kind of interesting too. So the point I was making there is economists have found that neighborhood is the biggest factor in trying to eliminate poverty. But when it comes down to you actually trying to do that, trying to get people out of those bad neighborhoods into the good ones, they're resistant to do that. So anyway, getting back to this, the rich are getting richer and income inequality. Also think about other countries that are not capitalist countries. Well, as I mentioned in a prior chapter, we don't have any worse income inequality than these communist countries. In fact, they found that the communist countries have worse income inequality than capitalist countries. So that's not the answer either. But anyway, let me show you, let me discuss now that it's true. The rich are getting richer, but there's some valid reasons for that. And these are the valid reasons. So of course, there is discrimination in the country, in the world. Life isn't fair. So that is, part of the reason for the income inequality is discrimination. But there are some valid reasons why the rich are getting richer and the poor are getting poorer. 75% of income inequality in this country can be explained by some valid reasons. So let's take a look at them. Well, we're getting older. We have an older population in this country. Older people tend to be wealthier. Why? Because they've had time to save money. They have time on their side, and they've taken advantage of the power of compounding. So the older you are, the more money you've saved, the more assets you have. So just the simple fact of an older population is going to make a society wealthier. Better educated. We are better educated. We have a better educated population now. So every economic study you can look at will show that there's a positive correlation between education and income. High school graduate versus undergrad college graduate, you're talking about $1 million more in earnings over their lifetime. So there is a positive correlation between that. So the better educated a population, the wealthier they're going to be. Okay, so these are the two big ones. This one, they mention in the book too. These are all in the book. Accounting fiction. What they mean here is that back 40 years ago or so, income taxes were much higher. And so people who were in business would use these tax shelters. And if you had corporate income, you could use these tax shelters more. So what they're saying here is that people who had businesses wouldn't pay themselves a salary. Say, for example, they would have all their income as a corporate income into their business. So they would be reporting their income as corporate income. When the taxes went down and these shelters went away, they didn't have the advantage of that. So they brought it over to their personal income. So it makes it look like incomes have gone up when they really haven't. It's just accounting fiction. All right. In addition to all this, think about the power of compounding regarding investment income. It's the old saying, it takes money to make money. So, and I teach this, I go over this in pretty much every undergraduate class that I teach. I go over this with students, trying to get students to start saving early and just save over time. And I show my undergrad students how if you're 20 years old and you save $5 a day, in other words, don't go to Starbucks or don't buy a lunch every day, save $5 a day. That is, let's see, the $5 a day. Hang on a second. I want to give you a wrong number. So 5 times, okay, that's $1,800 a year. So $5 a day, $150 a month, $1,800 a year. If you put that $1,800 a year into a a Roth IRA, individual retirement account, and put that and have that account in, say, Schwab or Fidelity, or any brokerage firm where you can invest in stocks, invest in the market. The average return in the market is 12%. But if you could just make 8% on that, by the time you're 70, age 20 to age 70, you've got $1 million. So I tell students that, most of us aren't trust fund kids. Most of us started from nothing. I started with nothing. And if you save over time, you'll have money. You'll have enough money. So just saving just think of that over your lifetime. Just saving $150 a month or $5 a day from the age of 20 to the age of 70, you're a millionaire. That's so easy to do, because think about that. You're going to actually be saving more than that, over the period of your life. So once that money starts growing, the power of compounding is huge. Anyway, it really does. I also show them, if you took the money out at age 65 versus age 70, that's like that's almost $250,000 increase in just those last 5 years because of the power of compounding. So anyway, start saving young, and you'll be wealthy. You'll be comfortable. And if you're not young anymore, if you're taking this class, this is an MBA class, if you're a little bit older, don't worry about that. It's never too late to save, because most of us, me included, procrastinate in our 20s and 30s and don't really even think about retirement till we're in our 40s. You still have enough time. You're going to have to save more than the $5 a day, but you still have enough time. So it does take money to make money. So you got to start saving as soon as you can. And that's another reason why the wealthier are getting wealthier, because if you have money, it compounds. All right. On a side note of this just reminded me about COVID, because when COVID hit, everybody thought, oh, we're going to go into a recession. It was all doom and gloom. Well, people have come out of COVID with more money than before. It's crazy when you think about it. Housing's up 30% over the past 2 years. People are spending money like crazy. What's up with that? Well, here's what happened. People have more money now. Most people are wealthier now than they were before COVID hit. Why might that be? Well, number one, the stimulus money. Not everybody had to spend that stimulus money to survive. So they got the stimulus money. Number two, they've reduced debt. Their net worth has gone up because people were stuck at home not doing anything. And they were paying, so they weren't spending any money, and they were paying off bills, paying down debt. So their net worth has gone up. And then a third reason is the stock market effect. That the markets are up. Of course, we've had a little bit of, this is March, today's March 18th, 2022. We have had a bit of a correction, 10% in the S&P 500, 20% in the small cap or high tech stocks like the NASDAQ index. So some indices are down 20%, others, the market in general, though, is down about 10%. But even so, we've had a pretty good run up in the market. So there's a wealth effect for people's housing values, and their retirement funds and their investment accounts, and then the stimulus money, and people have paid down debt. So we are, again, the wealthy people with money, the wealthy are getting wealthier. So that's kind of an add-on reason that really looks back to what's been going on the past 2 years. Okay, so what's the key to upward mobility? I talked about the neighborhoods, but here's the key to upward mobility: education. Every study you read talks about education. There's a positive correlation between education and income. Now, of course, I'm going to be biased because I teach in higher ed. I'm a believer in education because you need something to fall back on. What if you don't want to be middle-aged, and let's say coming out of high school, you have this great job, but then when you're in your 40s, you get laid off and you don't have an education to fall back on. So it's always good to have that education. But there's, as I mentioned before, if you have kids or you have relatives who that's not their thing, they don't really want to go to college, as if they get a trade that's in demand, they'll make a good living. So I do acknowledge that college isn't for everybody. Okay, now the bad news for people, for the lower wage groups. So education is good for everybody, for upward mobility. The news is getting worse for people with a high school education, or specifically for high school dropouts, because most of our immigrants are taking those jobs. So if you don't have a high school education, you're probably working in a menial job that doesn't require much skill or much education. Well, immigrants are competing with you, and they're willing to work for much lower wages than you are. So that's a problem. So for high school dropouts, wages have actually been lowered. Okay, so that is chapters 9 and chapter 10. Chapters 9 and 10, two very interesting chapters. And that's it for this section. Take care.